As you know, David, the 1990s is right when television was changing dramatically, and I got nowhere with the idea of a TV show, and I thought that I had just wasted 15 years of my life. One day I get a phone call, and they said, "Can you come in and speak on generational marketing strategies to 300 of the nation's senior-most banking and finance industry people? And if you can, you will speak right after President George W. Bush." Well, I had no idea what they were talking about, but this sounded like a payday. I was then 52 years old, and my net worth was minus $55,000. So I accepted it, and with that, all wonderful hell broke loose.
This is CIA, Contagious Influencers of America, the podcast. I'm David Sams. I will have to tell you, this is one episode that I'm really excited to bring you because I'm sharing this time with you, this very special time with you, at this very unique time in history, with a friend of mine. A gentleman that I have much, much, much respect for, someone who I actually listened to early in my career on the radio. He was the play-by-play guy. I mean the big guy on the microphone, behind the microphone, for the Ohio State Buckeyes, and I was a big. I'm still a big fan of the Ohio State Buckeyes, and unfortunately, the Big Ten decided that they weren't big enough to play football this season. Don't even get me started on this subject. It's just not going to be a fall. How many of you had a summer? I mean, seriously. It seems like every day has sort of melded together since March. You know, March went into April, into May, and it's like, where am I? You know, what day is it? Then we get into summer, and, you know, I'm sitting around here at the end of August thinking to myself, I got to take a vacation somewhere this summer. And it's like, wait a minute, it's almost Labor Day. And gosh, the Big Ten comes out with a schedule. And then 3 or 4 days later, there are rumors that they're going to just cancel the season after they've already released the revised schedule that's allegedly safe, and they've cut down all the extra travel, and they're only going to play conference games, blah blah blah, and then they just cut off everything, which is terrible for the kids, terrible for the businesses, the fans, the TV networks. College football generates something like $7 or $8 billion a year. I don't know what's going on out there, and by the way, I think it's pretty obvious what's going on, because if you really look at it, the conferences, as of the date of this recording, it may change, okay? But the conferences that have eliminated college football are all up and down the West Coast and all up in the northern states, where the Big Ten is. And I'm talking about, border states with Canada. I'm talking about, the Michigans, the Ohios, the Indianas, the Minnesotas, Maryland, Rutgers, New Jersey, New York, that whole area. And then everything south of that, as of this date, they're playing football, the SEC. Now I've got to find an SEC team to root for this year. You know what? I hope the SEC plays. I hope the Big 12 plays. I hope the ACC plays. I hope that they all knock it out of the park, and the Big Ten looks like a bunch of idiots. So, and then again, I'm sure they'll find that one or two guys that get COVID-19 and then end up in the ICU, and they'll just say it's Trump's fault. So we know to expect that. Okay. And by the way, I never get political on here, but now you're talking about getting rid of college football. Meantime, I see that AMC is going to open its doors, let us go to a movie beginning here in a couple, 3 weeks. Boy, it's happy days are here again. Now we get to go to the movies. We get to sit inside a theater. By the way, you wonder who is behind that. Hollywood liberals. All right? They let you go into a movie theater indoors, but then again, they don't want you going outside in a open stadium and watching college football outside. And forget about even having an audience. Nobody was expecting an audience. Nobody was expecting crowds. We were going to sit there and just watch it on TV and watch our boys play football down there. These are guys that are protected. They were getting tested twice a week. They live in a bubble. They have all these expert medical people around them. I mean, I think out of the 14 Big Ten schools, 13 have them have elite medical hospitals. State-of-the-art research programs, and they just didn't think it was safe. No. We're pulling the rug out from under them. They've been working for months and months. Some of them, this is going to be their big year. I know Justin Fields, our quarterback at Ohio State, everybody said he was destined for the Heisman Trophy this year. Ohio State was ranked number 1, I believe, in the preseason polls. But nope, not going to happen. But I'll tell you, they ought to just... and then they tell the schools that they're not going to get their share of the money. I think it was $50 million a school if they go off and play for this year with another league, another conference. So, you can kiss that. If you go do that, you can kiss that $50 million goodbye. So I told you, do not get me started. Do not get me started. But the guy that I have on today's show, now, I interviewed him prior to this decision being made. Otherwise, we would have talked about this for a half hour, I'm sure. Chuck Underwood is a great guy, okay? I've known him for quite some time. I loved, like I said, when I was a young guy, I'm not going to say I grew up listening to Chuck. He's not that much older than I am. But, when I was in my teenage years, my early years, I would listen to Chuck doing Ohio State football. And I will tell you, he made it exciting. He's one of the best play-by-play guys I have ever heard in my entire life. So when I went to Hollywood, most of you know I was a Hollywood producer. I was one of them for several years, and I was a distributor. I was a syndicator, meaning I got shows on TV stations around the country. And those little shows included Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, and one other one called Oprah Winfrey Show. And, when I left King World, I started doing my own shows. I'd made all those guys plenty of money doing what I did, helping to get those shows on the air and get them launched. Then I decided to go off and do my own programs. One of those shows was inspired by my love for roller derby. I know it just does not add up. You're thinking to yourself, how in the world does a guy who's doing what he does now, what do you mean he's a roller derby guy? Well, when I was a young kid, I would watch roller derby with my uncle because he was the youngest son of my grandparents. And on Saturday nights, he would watch roller derby in Cincinnati on WXIX. And I'm going to cover this with Chuck, so I'm not going to get too much into it now. But let's just say that I had that in my blood. When I went to Hollywood, I wanted to reinvent roller derby. Not from day one. It came to me later on because I thought, wow, this would be really cool to do because, wrestling was getting big. And I thought I can put a bunch of good-looking people. In the old days, by the way, we'd have said hot chicks and hunks, but these are not those days, so I won't say that. So we can put a lot of good-looking people on skates with colorful uniforms, and they can play roller derby. Now, for those of you who have no idea what roller derby happens to be, it's a competitive, let's just call it sports entertainment. Okay, it's half. First of all of these are athletes. When you see it, there is no way that you can play roller derby unless you are an athlete. And you have got to be one heck of an athlete to do what they do. And you will see that when you watch Fox Sports, because I did a little show called Roller Games back in the day, like 30 years ago. And when I had the opportunity to get the play-by-play guy that I absolutely wanted on the show, I knew I had to get Chuck Underwood, because I loved him as a Ohio State Buckeye broadcaster, and I thought, man, wouldn't it just be cool to meet Chuck Underwood and hang out with Chuck and do a show with Chuck? And at the time, he was not on the air that I recall, and I thought he must be available, and he was. And he thought, wow, this will give me an opportunity to go to Hollywood and do something fun. So I did a deal with him. I also did a deal to direct the show. I got the guy that invented. I'm talking about the guy who invented. He was one of two guys actually who invented Monday Night Football. Roone Arledge, the legendary Roone Arledge. He actually invented Monday Night Football. He didn't invent football, but he put football Monday night in prime time on ABC. And his right-hand conspirator was a guy by the name of Chet Forty. Chet was a sports director, not like a sports department director, but an actual, director, like a movie director, TV director. He was a sports director, and they got together and did this incredible presentation on Monday nights called Monday Night Football, which was a staple for many, many years. Still is on ESPN, but back in the day when there were only 3 networks, Monday Night Football was the show. One of the top shows of the week. I think it was like top 5 every week. It was the bad boy of Monday night. So I got Chet, and then and I brought in my friends from Motown, because back in those days I wanted all this great music. You know how the Super Bowl does its big deal. I wanted this big halftime show, so I was able to bring in Motown, and we put together some incredible acts for halftime back in those shows. So at any rate, I saw that this pandemic was going to break out, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh. There's all these sports network. There's like ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU, ESPN this, ESPN that. And then there's Fox Sports, 1, 2, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's like there's all these sports networks. And I thought, man, all these guys are going to be out of stuff because this pandemic, this is not we're not going back. I'm sorry. As much as I love our president, when he said we're all going back to church by Easter, I'm like, I don't know. That doesn't seem quite realistic, but I hope it does. But I don't think it's going to happen. Well, here it is, August now, but back in what was it, April, May? It may have been right after Easter. I thought that's when I thought, man, this is not looking good. And so at any rate, I decided to pitch the networks, ESPN and Fox, and try to get roller games back on the air and reinvent it, really. I mean, basically bring it back to life, remaster it, make it look good, and put it back on the air. And so I sent out a couple of pitches. One of them I sent out to ESPN, the other one to Fox. ESPN basically laughed, said, "Are you kidding me? Get lost." Fox basically said, where do we sign? This sounds pretty cool. And I really enjoyed the relationship with Fox. The advertising isn't, the advertising market has been pretty dismal, tell you the truth. That's tough for everybody in television right now. Ad rates are way down. And of course, there are a lot of businesses that are going out of business, and so that's been tough, but the people at Fox have been they've been remarkable. They've been great to work with. I can't say enough kudos to the folks over at Fox Sports. And I got to revive. I got to bring back to life my relationship with Chuck Underwood after all these years. Now, we're not here for me to talk about roller games the whole time. And Chuck and I, when you hear us, we're going to rattle on about this for about 15, 20 minutes before we actually talk about why I wanted him on the show. At some point, Chuck decided to go legit. I'm talking about legit, meaning he decided to get out of the broadcasting business and get into the business of speaking before some of America's greatest companies, some of America's most prominent CEOs. He decided to basically become an expert. And what he decided to do was he saw some trends happening. And he saw, he saw some things that we're going to get into that rattled his brain. And he thought, wow, this is, somebody needs to connect the dots here. And that's what he did. He is a generational expert, meaning that he is one of a half a dozen people in the world who created the field of generational study. And he has put some 3 decades of research, of training, of consulting, and speaking into this. And he speaks all over the United States, Canada, Europe, and he trains businesses and government and educators on this whole thing of generational dynamics. Now, some of you might be going, oh my gosh, David, this sounds like the most boring thing that you've ever had in some 80 episodes of CIA. And I'm telling you right now, hold your horses. Okay? Give me just a minute. What else do you got to do? I mean, seriously. It's not like you can go out and party. It's not like you can go to a concert. It's not like, what are you doing? Okay? You're probably not even commuting. You're probably listening to me out on your walk at night because we're in this, semi-lockdown situation, this pandemic situation. I'm telling you why Chuck Underwood is somebody that you have got to know and you've got to listen to. Because this guy has done this research on the importance of America's generations and the differences between the generations. You know, there's like 5 living generations at any given time. And, a lot of you have great grandma or even great grandma living with you. Some of you have grandma living with you and you got the grandbaby living with you. I mean, and none of us think alike. Okay. I mean, I've got daughters that are in college and they look at me as the old guy. I'm telling you right now. And I don't look at myself as the old guy. I don't even look at my dad as the old guy. And my dad's 81? I don't look at my dad as the old guy, for crying out loud. But my daughters look at me as being like, well, Dad, you're a single guy and, we hope you find love before you die. Because, your days are limited and you only have so many more days. And it's like, my gosh, why are you painting such a glim picture? But, they think different. And they're wonderful kids and all that. And but they just think different. So I wanted Chuck on because we are going through some stuff in America right now that we're trying to get a grip on, that we're trying to really figure out. And I wanted to bring on him because he's a guy that can help us connect some dots that we just don't have the expertise to be able to do that. But he helps us do that. The other thing is that the religion in America is, there are some, we're going through some troubling times here. Are we going to be like Europe here any day now? Is it, we were always a Judeo-Christian state of mind and country. And man, you really wonder how much longer that's going to continue. So I wanted to bring Chuck on to help us understand a little better what we're going through. And the other thing I wanted to bring him on is that there's a lot you can learn from the past. A lot you can learn from the past. You know, we've been through this pandemic thing before in 1918, and apparently, from everything I've read, it took like 5 years for America to get back to somewhat normal. And America back then was a different country. We weren't. First of all, we were still a young country. A lot of it was undeveloped. Plus, there was a lot of farms. There were a lot of farms. We didn't live on top of one another like we do now, with the exception of the East Coast. It was quite populated in some areas there, but nothing like it is now. And so, you got to bring up population, because obviously with people living on top of one another in a pandemic situation, and with the social distancing thing and the mask thing and everything else. It makes a difference when you got millions of people living on top of one another. And we didn't even have that, 102 years ago. So I wanted to talk to Chuck about that. I wanted to see what it was like to recover, what it was like to get back on our feet, what we learned. I wanted to find out how America has gotten through other just mind-boggling times, tough times. I mean, the Depression, World War I, World War II, for crying out loud. What did we learn, and how did we push through it? How did we connect the dots and get back on our feet and get past all this craziness? So I took a little more time than I normally take at the top of this. And by the way, let me tell you, I've got a couple of favorite podcasts. These guys get on there and they seem to talk for an hour before they bring on the guest. And some of these guys I like. I admit, you know what? I feel like I can take my walk at night, and I walk about 5 miles a night, and I put on these guys, and I feel like I'm having a cup of coffee with them. We're just sharing. Forget the coffee. I'm having a tequila and a cigar with them. And or maybe it's a bourbon Coke, but and the thing of it is I don't mind their talking for 20 minutes. Sometimes they get on my nerves, and guess what I do? I just hit the fast forward button. Actually, is it called a fast forward button? I think I just hit the little dot and take it forward a little bit, and I get to the interview. So if you ever find that I'm just driving you nuts because I just go on, please just take that little finger, that index finger of yours, and just move it to the right wherever you want it to stop. Okay, that works for me. So let's get to my interview now with the one and only Mr. America's Generation himself, the star of the PBS television miniseries, America's Generations, with Chuck Underwood. Take it away, Chuck. Hey, Chuck, how are you?
David, I'm wonderful. How are you?
I am absolutely fantastic. Oh my gosh. If the world only knew our past history, I mean, just a little disclosure here. Chuck and I go back a few years, quite a number of years. I want to say that Chuck was one of my heroes when I was a young lad in Columbus, Ohio. You must have been a young lad too. I mean, you're not much older than I am, but you were the play-by-play mastermind of the Ohio State Buckeyes on radio, and I'm like, man, this guy is unbelievable.
Well, I'm grateful that connected us to eventually working together out in Hollywood on roller games.
That's right. For the folks listening in, we did a show together called Roller Games, and it was something that I just absolutely had to call the best to come in and call the games. I sold this show that was basically roller derby reinvented, with a figure eight track, a wall of death, a sky jump, an alligator pit, and cheerleaders, and a crazy crowd. And I thought, man, I got to call the best play caller in the country, and somebody that's going to bring some legitimacy to all of this. And boy, did I ever make the right call, Chuck, and bringing you on board.
Well, thank you for that. And what I remember about the project is that because of the figure eight track and because of all the skaters involved, you had to sell this to stations in market by market without a pilot show, which is almost impossible to do. And yet, I believe you cleared roller games in just about 100% of the country on the strength of a simple paper brochure. And I say simple, but it had been done spectacularly. And somehow you got stations around the country to sign up for the show on something they were reading on their desk instead of the traditional pilot show.
Yeah, I'll tell you. By the way, I think Ms. Georgia Haas is at your front door.
Georgia Haas, she was one of many characters on that show, wasn't she?
Yeah, she played the manager of the team Bad Attitude. They were always causing some kind of havoc, and she was the queen of mean on the series, and she was always causing all these controversies. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, you can tune in to Fox Sports. The series is currently airing on Fox Sports 1 and 2. And Chuck, you're right. As far as when I grew up, I was 10 years old. I stayed at my grandparents, and excuse me, my uncle Danny loved roller derby, and he would watch the roller derby games every Saturday night on WXIX in Cincinnati. You know, those days only had 3 TV networks and an independent in most markets. And he would love to watch roller derby. And then I got hooked on it when I was like 10 years old. And he then started taking me to the roller derby games at the old Cincinnati Gardens.
Yep.
And those were the days where the roller derby people would get they would get mad at each other, and they would throw chairs. And every once in a while, a metal chair would end up being whirled into the audience. Can you imagine that going on today? And so when I got to Hollywood,
well, I was just going to say, what you took a dusty black and white concept and jazzed it up to the 20th power, and you gave it the glitz and the sharpness that it needed to compete during the years that it was on. So it was an enormous jump forward for that sport.
Well, it was fun. When my partner Mike and I came up with this, the concept of the figure eight and the wall of death and the alligator pit and all that. The reality is we couldn't find anybody to give us $1 million to build the thing. I mean, to build the set, it was going to cost about, I think, $800,000. And in TV syndication back in those days, by the way, that would be equivalent to about $1.5 million now. There was no way he was going to find somebody to put up that kind of money. So we actually hired an artist to do an artist conception of of what we envisioned, and it was beautiful. And then we made a brochure from that, and we went out and sold that to TV stations across the country and cleared it in about half the country. And I will tell you, the big change was at one point, I was being interviewed by a reporter, I believe from Associated Press, who asked me, we had this artist rendition of the set, and we had the wall of death, the sky jump, and a water obstacle that players could knock each other into. But at that time, there was no alligators. And I'll never forget, this reporter came to my office to interview me, and when I was showing them this big painting and how the game's going to be played, because he wanted to write an article on this. He said, when I got to the water pit, he leaned over and he says, what's in there? Alligators? Very sarcastically. I mean, this was some guy that obviously thought he should be, going to the to the White House and interviewing the president, not interviewing the guy that's bringing back roller derby, right? So when he says, "What's in there, alligators?" I just leaned over and I just said, it could be devastating. And 2 days later, the guy writes an article. An article comes out with a headline: "Roller derby reinvented with live alligators." Then all of a sudden, the phone started ringing off the hook. Stations all across America wanted the show where the alligators were trying to eat the players. Everybody went nuts. All of a sudden, I went from like 50% of the country cleared to 60 to 70 to 80 to 90%. And then I had to go to the league, the old man, commissioner.
Yeah. Bill.
Oh yeah. And I had to break the news to him that we had to put alligators on the set. And of course he didn't want anything to do with alligators. He didn't want alligators trying to eat his players. And then we had to do research on how to get alligators there without eating people. And then the next thing you know is, after doing all this research in Florida and finding out that alligators don't move if the temperature is not warm enough. And we went back to the commissioner and told him, he says, "Yeah, but you turn on the TV lights and the alligators are going to come alive and they're going to eat my people." So ultimately, we ended up hiring a couple of stunt guys that became trained roller gator skaters. And we decided to use the roller gators, what we call them. We decided to use the gators to only in the case of a tie. Remember that?
Yep.
And the tie was, the whole idea was that if the game ends in regulation in a tie, we would bring out the roller gator, throw him in the tank, and then the gator skaters would skate against each other, and whoever knocked the other player into the tank would get the extra point and win the game. And as a result, we brought new meaning to the term sudden death overtime. And here you are, the most legitimate play-by-play guy in the country, the voice at one point, the great voice of the great Ohio State Buckeyes. I pull you out to Hollywood. By the way, I also pulled the #1 director in the history of sports television, Jeff Forty, who invented Monday Night Football with Roone Arledge, the great Roone Arledge. And I convinced him to do this too. It was the craziest couple of weeks that I've ever lived in my life, Chuck. I mean, and by the way, you helped me so much. I had never done this before. I had never been on the air before. I was like a puppy, and you took me under your wing there and helped me get through it. And we pulled it off. But man, without you, I would have been totally lost. And by the way, I didn't really want to do that. But Chet, I remember Chet convinced me that I had to do it. He says, "Who else is going to be crazy enough to be the color commentator on the craziest thing I've ever been involved with, other than you?"
Well, and I remember Chad also said this when we were getting ready to tape the shows. He said, David, he said, "This show is finished in only one place on earth, and that is inside your brain." And he said, "You need to be there and really on top of this, and you need to be the color commentator, because Chuck and I are going to be learning the sport, learning the feel that you're looking for, learning the outcome that you want during and at the end of each show." So you created something from literally nothing, because the old roller derby was nothing like what you created. So you started from scratch, and you had to be involved in every component of the production. And I just watched you move around for several months at Mach 1 speed and somehow put the pieces together. It is a good story.
What has been a lot of fun, back then, 30 years ago, when we did that, I was the color commentator, the producer, the executive producer, blah blah blah. I was in constant meetings with the commissioner. I was dealing with players. I was dealing with the training facility. I was dealing with partners. And then of course we brought our trackside gal along who was amazing, Shelley Jameson, and
Yep.
who's now like a bigwig with the is it the Phoenix Fire Department?
Yep.
There was so much going on in a very short period of time, because if you'll recall, we shot the entire series, the games, over a couple of weekends. I mean, I remember you and I had to wear the same clothes. We just changed ties.
Yeah, we would tape 2 and 3 shows at a shot, and Chet, 40, and I would wake up in the hotel each morning, and we knew, as you said, that you were going in a million different directions at once. So Chet and I would just have a really long breakfast because we didn't go over to the site for the tapings until early to late afternoon. And we said, how can we help David? And I looked at Chet and I said, Chet, directing, you were the one who created ABC's legendary coverage of the Olympics in the 60s and 70s. You did Monday Night Football. And I said, I know play-by-play. Let you and I pin down the part that we can do so that David doesn't have to worry about either one of us, because he's got a full plate elsewhere. That was our breakfast discussion each day.
And I tell you, I so appreciate that. And what I really, really am having a ball doing now, 30 years later, is going back in and I had the opportunity to totally remaster the games. I had an opportunity to take them from standard def to high def, from the old TV format to 16:9. Chuck, I'm telling you, I think that these things, with everything that's going on in the country right now, with the pandemic and with the meltdown of America in so many ways, and with sports being in such turmoil, we don't even know if we're going to have college football or how much we're going to have. And then all of a sudden this hits the screen. It makes you smile again. It makes you cheer again. I cannot tell you how happy I am to see fans, crazy fans. I mean, these are almost like college football fans, okay? I cannot tell you how much fun it is to watch these crazy fans in the audience going nuts, okay? Yep. So this is going to be fun. Then again, it's going to be, it is on Fox Sports, FS1, FS2, primarily on the weekend, Saturday, Sunday night. So check your local listings. And I just appreciate you reminiscing with me here a little bit. And man, I will never, ever, ever forget, and I'll never be able to repay you enough for you really covering for me as I was learning on the job.
Well, we were all learning because it was a brand new concept, and I think, and the skaters were learning, and the producers, everybody. And I think when that's the case, you all pull together. I've recently been watching a documentary about Motown, and Barry Gordy, who created Motown, talks throughout this documentary with Smokey Robinson, and they basically said the same thing. We didn't know what we were doing, but we were all in it together. And because we weren't sure of what was going to happen tomorrow, we all just drew closer and closer together. And you had that vibration with our team with roller games.
Oh, thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. Hey, I have always admired you because you're a very forward-thinking guy. I know over the years we also kicked around a couple of other TV concepts, and you were always sort of looking you're not a rear view mirror kind of guy when it comes to thinking forward, but you are a rear view thinking guy when it comes to America's generations. And I just want to emphasize to folks Okay, now that we've talked about all this craziness that we've lived our past life here, our lives here, but Chuck has become the foremost authority on the generational dynamics, and I'm talking about I mean, well, here I am. I'm like 60, and Chuck, we've got I've got daughters who are what, 21, 23. My parents are what now, in their 80s, 81, and so right there you've got what, three generations.
Yeah,
I have lived in a family before where, let me see, when my grandmother was alive and my great grand, I've lived in a I see 4-generational family. I don't know if that's the right way of saying it. I know some people have
probably.
lived in 5 generations somehow, but
Yeah.
let me ask you the obvious question. How do you go doing play by play, whether it be the Buckeyes or roller games? And I know you had some other big gigs along the way. How do you go from doing sports play by play to being America's foremost expert in this whole generational studies, dynamic speaking?
Well, the short answer is it was one of those magical lightning bolt moments. And it struck me when I was having dinner with 9 other people in Columbus, Ohio. I had just met these people recently. We were all hardworking. And on a Tuesday evening, we said, you know what? We had a nice time at this low-key cocktail hour a couple of weeks ago. Let's all go to dinner and get better acquainted. And so I found myself sitting at this very long booth that seated 5 people on one side, 5 on the other. I found myself across from a gentleman who, as it turns out, was 15 years older than I. The other people on either side of us had their own conversations going. I don't recall the topic, David, but at some point he said something and I said in return, I'll bet you and I feel differently about that because you and I came of age in different times in America. Well, we both started poking around at that. We found ourselves saying, my generation, your generation. And we got so wrapped up in the conversation that the other people on either side of us began listening and then began chiming in. And suddenly the conversation went from ordinary to incendiary. And finally, we noticed after a number of hours that the lights up in the ceiling were being flicked on and off, on and off. And we looked up for the first time in 5 hours. The restaurant had emptied. The wait staff was over in the corner, flipping the light switch on and off to get our attention, to get the hell out of there, because they had closed the restaurant an hour ago. And so we left the restaurant laughing. We went our separate ways to our cars. And as I walked to my car with no one within 100 yards of me, I literally said out loud, only to myself, what the hell just happened in there?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
None of the others were stricken by that same lightning bolt, but that began it. And I spent 15 years starving, searching for content that didn't exist because generational study did not exist back then. And finally, in the year 2000, I found a book in a half-price bookstore that was called Generations. As it turns out, it was the first book ever written about America's generations. I tracked down the authors, and this was just before the internet, so I had to track them down the old-fashioned way. They were a Harvard MBA and a Yale MBA. And I just called them and I said, hey, I'm very interested in generations. And so the 3 of us struck up a relationship. Well, as you know, my background had been in television, and I was thinking of using generations as a concept for a Phil Donahue type talk show, a thoughtful daytime talk show. I taped a pilot at a PBS station in Ohio. I flew in those two authors. I flew in the father of actor George Clooney. His name is Nick Clooney, and several others, and we did a pilot show. And then we took that pilot tape to Hollywood and to New York and paraded it in front of all the big syndicators. But as you know, David, the 1990s is right when television was changing dramatically. Syndication was changing dramatically, and I got nowhere with the idea of a TV show, and I thought that I had just wasted 15 years of my life. One day I get a phone call, and it's from a speakers bureau in Washington, D.C., and I didn't even know what a speakers bureau was. And they said, can you come in and speak on generational marketing strategies to 300 of the nation's senior-most banking and finance industry people? And if you can, you will speak right after President George W. Bush and right before Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Well, I had no idea what they were talking about, but this sounded like a payday, and I was beyond broke. I was then 52 years old, and my net worth was minus $55,000. I had gotten very little work for 15 years, so I accepted it, went in and spoke, and with that, all wonderful hell broke loose. The timing was right. The two authors of the books called me because they were going to be speaking there too. And I told them, gee, I don't want to embarrass you guys. You've written a book about the generations, and I've just been thinking of it as a TV show, and they're asking me to talk business strategies to all these senior executives. And the two authors said, you don't get it. The three of us are it. We are generational strategy. And they laughed when they said, you can tell these people anything you want, and they're going to have to believe it. And they said that knowing that I do my homework. Well,
I have to tell you two things. Number one, I'm so sorry I had that kind of influence on your career that you went from roller games to being $55,000 in debt a few years later.
Yes.
That's number one. Number two, I have to tell you for the folks listening right now, the reason I absolutely wanted to have you on the podcast, number one, we're called Contagious Influencers of America. And if you're going to be a contagious influencer, I don't care if you're a business leader, if you're a pastor, regardless of what your profession is, you better understand that a 20-year-old thinks a heck of a lot differently than a 50-year-old, and a 50-year-old has nothing to do with the way an 80-year-old thinks. And so for those of you, let's back up just a little bit. Explain to our audience what we're talking about when we're talking about America's generations, generational study, and explain to them why this is important, especially in this day and age when we see such a disarray of craziness across the country with people chanting for this and other people thinking the country's going to hell because it's not like the good old days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Explain to people why generational studies is more important today than ever before.
Well, we had to build an answer to that question from absolutely nothing. So we did a lot of years of research, and here are the basic principles of this field of study. Between the time we're born and the time that we clear the classroom years, either high school around age 18, or if we're fortunate enough, college at, say, 22, in those classroom years of our lives, all of us are going to form a long list of very powerful core values that will guide our decision-making for the rest of our lives. And those core values will be molded by the times that we witnessed all around us growing up, and by the teachings that are pounded into us by older generations of parents, educators, religious leaders, and others. And any time in American life, either the times or the teachings or both change in a widespread coast-to-coast way and in a significant way, it means that young kids born after that change are going to experience different times and teachings, mold different core values, and thus become our next generation. So a generation is an age group, and the generations tend to be roughly about 16 to 21 years in length. A generation is an age group that shared similar formative years, times, and teachings, and as a result, molded similar core values that are now going to influence their consumer decisions, their career choices, and their on-the-job performance, their lifestyle preferences, their personal behavior, and their friendships. So if we understand what happened to any generation during its formative years, we can then make sense of their core values. And when we can make sense of their core values, we can market products to them, design products for them, and products include television shows. We can manage them more effectively in the workplace. We can get better performance from them in their college years. And we can maximize our own family relationships and our own friendships. So that's the essence of generational study and strategies.
And for those of you who are listening right now, I'll tell you, Chuck takes this very seriously. Number one, he is the number one most. He's the guy. Whenever a corporation wants to do a study or they have a symposium or a conference, Chuck is there, and he's the guy they call on for the keynote speeches. He also has written a book, which is, oh my gosh, what is this thing? 700 and I know it's almost like 800 pages, called America's Generations in the Workplace, Marketplace, and Living Room. And this is this is the Bible of the comprehensive generational dynamics and business strategies. Chuck, I have to ask you, let's give us an example. Right now, we see things going on in the country that we see the country upside down. We see the marching in the streets. We see the turmoil. We see the distrust. We see a lot of people who feel like we need a change in the way that America thinks and has done business, and then you got a lot of folks my age out there, and then you have a lot of folks my parents' age, which my parents were they were born in 1939, so they were youngsters during World War II. Which I think you refer to as America's greatest generation, right?
America's greatest generation is the GI generation, and they were the ones who fought World War II.
And I've written a couple things on Facebook. We have this big fight going on right now about whether we should wear a mask or something. And I don't want to get into the politics side of it, but the bottom line is that you look at the generation that my grandparents grew up in, which I think is the silent generation, as I recall, right? In the late 1910-ish, 1915.
Yeah, well, real quickly, the GI generation this year is age 94 and older. The silent generation this year is 75 to 93.
Okay.
Baby boomers are 56 to 74. Gen X is 39 to 55. The millennials are 18 to 38, and the generation that unfortunately is going to be stuck with the name Generation Z is only just arriving in adulthood. And so they are today's 17 and 18-year-olds. We do not become a member of a generation until we leave the high school years.
Wait. What, millennials are how old? What's the oldest?
Millennials are 18 to 38.
38. I mean, I remember using the term millennials like they were like, teenagers, 20 years old. Now they're 38. Man, I'll tell you, the years are just flying by. My whole thing on this mask thing, if you look at my grandparents, they were little kids during the 1918 pandemic, right?
Flu.
And here they, or flu, right? Swine flu. And here's the deal. I've read a lot of stuff that it took America like 5 years to get back to normal after that thing. So a lot of big things didn't go on. And of course we didn't have back then, I don't think, stadiums that hold 100,000 people. Well, maybe we did. I think Ohio Stadium was built back then, right? Before that. But
yeah, most of those big stadia were built in the 1920s.
Yeah, so look at all of the sacrifices that people have made between the Great Depression and the World Wars, and people that had to leave their families sometimes to get work for months or a year or 2 years. I know my grandpa did, and now we're sitting around griping about whether or not we have to wear a mask to walk into Costco. I mean, there's like, there's something about this generation, or there's something going on right now that people just don't understand the sacrifice that the earlier generations made to get through whatever we had to get through in America. Now people won't even wear a freaking mask. And by the way, it's not that I am a big fan of wearing the mask. All right. But I just wonder if, when we study the generations and what each of the generations have experienced and gone through, why aren't we learning more? Do we really, I realize every time we have a national attack or a 9/11, we say we'll never forget. And that may be a term of the past. And I think we forget the next day on a lot of these things. What is it that's going on? Why don't we realize that, America has always been in disarray? I mean, we've had rioting in the streets. We had duels for crying out loud for forever, where guys would go out in a cornfield and shoot one another to settle a dispute. What is going on now? Have we just totally lost it? Why don't we understand from the previous generations that, hey, you know what? We truly are all in this together. This isn't just some slogan.
Well, generational study reveals some answers to those questions that all of the talking heads have not yet covered on the CNNs and the Fox News channels and all of the others. And it kind of goes in this order. America experienced an extraordinary period in the 1950s, 60s, and into the 70s because the generation that was taking its turn at the top of America, business America, government America, education America, religion America, was the greatest generation. They had molded their core values, David, during a childhood of that flu pandemic that you mentioned, and then a few years in the 20s of tremendous economic growth, but then the Great Depression, followed by the worst war in human history. When the war ended and 16 million GI troops came home and their wives stepped out of the factories after building tanks and airplanes for the troops, and they went home to build families, the GIs would never, ever think of sending American jobs overseas, because the people they would put out of work would have been the people who only a few years earlier had crouched with them in a foxhole in Europe in a firefight with the enemy, or who had walked into a cave together on a Pacific island where the enemy was waiting in the deep, dark recesses of that cave to kill them. What came out of the Great Depression and World War II was exactly what you said. We're all in this together, so let's truly help each other and let's never abandon each other. Those core values took their turn at the top of America in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when the GI generation had moved up into those age brackets where they were now the presidents of the companies. They dominated Congress, they dominated the White House. The reason that America suddenly began to splinter, there are several reasons. One is the generation that took its turn at the top in the 1990s and 2000s, and that was the silent generation. They kind of divided the 1980s with the youngest GIs and the oldest silents themselves. The silent generation, by their formative years, were never prepared to lead. They were brilliant as educators in the classroom. They were brilliant as newspaper publishers and as architects and engineers, but they were very bad leaders. On their leadership watch, the richest few got richer, the middle class was essentially disassembled and ravaged, and what came out of the silent leadership era, and this now explains why people are not participating in wearing a mask and keeping 6 feet apart, the middle class took an absolute beating. And with that came bitterness, distrust of people at the top. This is not a political statement. This is a statement of fact. The reason Donald Trump was elected president 4 years ago is because of angry white men of multiple generations who have had the tar knocked out of them in their careers, and especially blue-collar jobs that have been sent overseas. So the reason that people are not participating is they're bitter and they don't trust people at the top, so they are defiant. And yet they could all go back to work very, very swiftly. They could all get paychecks again. They could go to their favorite baseball game, out to restaurants to mingle with people, if only they would all wear masks and if only they would all remain 6 feet apart. But their anger and their defiance has them saying, to hell with anybody in authority who tells me I need to do something. And therein is the problem with COVID-19.
Oh, I can relate to that. I'll tell you, I consider myself a conservative. I consider myself to, I don't think it's any secret. I voted for the president, but I will tell you, I have really been somewhat appalled over the last month or two. Because I was, I was a little, I questioned the mask thing because, back in whatever it was, April, there was like, wear a mask. Then it was the Surgeon General came out and said, don't wear a mask, and it was back and forth there. And it's like, come on, really? And then, I kept a close eye on this, and I could see the fact that the social, by the way, what I really did, I started doing my homework. I got off social media and I started doing my homework, and I started listening to certain podcasts, history podcasts, and I started listening to podcasts regarding the pandemic of 1918, the whole swine flu thing, and what the impact that had on culture, on our economy, and the whole mask thing. And I'm like, why are we talking more about history here and about what we've learned and about what did work? And by the way, the whole cover-up of the pandemic back then is pretty amazing. because Wilson really wanted support for the war effort, for what was going on, and he didn't want any disarray. So,
Yeah.
yeah. By the way, wasn't Wilson a Democrat?
Oh, gosh, good question. I study our living generation, so I only go back to about the 1940s.
Yeah, no, I think, but the bottom line is that this, like you said, it's not about politics, okay? I mean, it is today because they're making it that. But I will tell you, I started getting really concerned because I saw all of these people that, generally speaking, we agree on a lot of things online, and I just said, you know what, I am hunkered down. I am not going out and doing crazy things. I am not. I go to the grocery store. I go to Costco. I do wear a mask, and I have forever. And when I do go out, I walk several miles every night. I've walked about 600 miles since the pandemic broke out in March. It's
good for you.
It's been a game changer for me. But I see all these people online going, "I'll never wear a mask," and this is they're taking away our rights. I'm like, taking away our rights? Seriously? And then I read other studies that say if we would just wear the daggone mask for 4 to 6 weeks, this whole thing would go away. It would go away. And I'm like, what is wrong if we try it? And what if it works? We could be back by college football season. We could be rid of this thing if we all just cooperated and tried something. But there is no such thing as all doing it together. All these ridiculous network TV spots saying we're in it together. It's a bunch of nonsense. Nobody's in it together. So I think it's really interesting what you just spelled out, and I don't understand why you're not on every TV network explaining what the heck is going on and what impact this has on the generations and why people feel the way that they feel. Because in order to understand and in order to really truly figure out what it is we need to do to bring people together, you've got to connect the dots, and that's what that's your job. But yes, obviously these TV networks don't have very good booking people, or you'd be on morning, noon, and night and talking about it. Now let's jump to something else. Let's take something easy.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's get off the mask kick. Let's talk with legalization of marijuana.
Sure.
Okay. Let's talk, because CBD is big now. The THC is legal in X number of states, and it was becoming a big issue. Now, of course, COVID-19's taken everything off the table. The reason I bring this up is because I have a feeling I'm going to touch on some things that are very generational, that you can very easily explain why some generations feel differently than other generations, and what to expect from a generational expert standpoint, what to expect going forward with something like the use of or legalization of marijuana.
Several years ago, I spoke at the World Marijuana Conference in Orlando, and I gave the opening keynote speech and then some individual breakout sessions. And in the audience was someone from the Canadian Marijuana Association, and he instantly invited me to join singer Melissa Etheridge and speak at the Canadian conference. So yes, I have followed marijuana, and each generation, you're right, David, has had a significantly different experience, not just with marijuana, but with drugs. And it was my job to lay out each generation's experience. The baby boomers are the ones who propelled forward the drug revolution. Now, marijuana and various types of it had been around for some time. Some of the old jazz musicians from the 20s and 30s used to smoke it, but it really launched with the boomers in the 1960s. Nobody knew about any of the drugs being used then and what their impact would be. And so people died. People got very, very screwed up, including some of our fighting men in the Vietnam War. And drugs instantly got a very bad name. In the 1970s and 80s, young Generation X was coming of age, and they were the first kids to be sitting in the living room when mom and dad had another couple over to play cards, and the parents were smoking dope. So it was less of a shock to them. It was less bad to them. So they sort of grew up saying, okay, that's what drugs is. They didn't see the trauma that their parents had gone through 20 years earlier. Millennials come of age suddenly now with marijuana being legalized, not just for medicinal purposes, but also for recreational use in state after state after state. And there is a national map that you can go to, a state map of the US, and see what the latest count is. The last I saw was right around 19 or 20 states have approved recreational. But what we're finding is that recreational marijuana, even though the top 95% of people who use it can handle it, recreational marijuana is picking off that bottom 5%, and sometimes, and in some regions, it's 10% of people who don't have whatever the personal fortitude is to be able to handle it. I spoke in Colorado very soon after they had approved recreational pot. And I had a woman in my audience come up to me and say, in the first week of Colorado decriminalizing recreational pot, a stoned husband shot his wife with a shotgun over a minor disagreement. 11 elementary school children showed up at the same school stoned, and at a retirement center, some seniors started smoking it, not knowing what was happening, and they fell and broke bones. There seems to be a pretty strong consensus that there is legitimate medicinal value to medicinal pot, and it's now being sold throughout most of the country. But recreational marijuana is just like pornography, and it's just like gambling casinos. 95% of the people who are exposed to porn can handle it, but 5% can't. 95% of the people can walk into a casino, and I've trained, by the way, many of the casinos in this country in generational marketing strategies. 95% can go into a casino and not become addicted to gambling, but again, the bottom 5% keep getting picked off. The bottom 5%, the bottom 5%. And the question becomes, for those of us who are concerned, when are we going to quit picking off the bottom 5 or 10% in the interest of profit?
Well, I could also say that those percentages or that outcome's a little better than my marriages. That hasn't worked out for me. So it's if I had a 95% win average, that's pretty good.
Yes, wouldn't we all?
But seriously, I mean, if you look at alcohol, it's got to be 95%, maybe less.
Yeah, same. Anything that can be addictive, and anything that we lean on to try to make our lives better when that is not the intention of the product. When we take that risk, we're asking too much of the product. And that's when we get hurt.
Yeah, I'm not a proponent of legalizing marijuana. I'm not for anybody listening to this. I'm using this as an example as to the importance of generational studies with somebody like Chuck, because our attitude just does change over a period of time. I've seen the polls of people that say, recreational marijuana ought to be legal in the United States. I think it's over 60% now. the last I saw, maybe it was mid 60s, whereas, 20 years ago, I think it was like 40% or something. And
Well, I'll tell you what the big one is, David.
Mhm.
The big one, the big one right now is pornography. About 10 years ago, when our nation was in the heat of the battle in its war against terrorism, the Army and the Navy and the Air Force sent me to its bases around Western Europe to train them in actually a long list of generational strategies. But when I was working with the Navy in Italy, their psychiatric team said, we are having a terrible increase in sexual violence by our male troops against our female troops, not just against women they don't know, but against their own fellow sisters in uniform. And it has become a major problem. And a psychiatrist at that base in Italy asked me if I could develop what turned out to be the world's first training program in generational behavioral health care strategies to help psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers to better understand their clients, their patients along generational lines. And so what we talked about with sex is how profoundly different each generation's experience with sex has been. The silent generation waited until they were married. The next generation, the boomers, launched the sexual revolution, and the world was a sexual playground. Generation X came along as the illegitimate children of the boomers, but they also came of age when pornography, because of computers and soon after the internet, was now accessible. Millennials came of age where, with such total access to pornography, the act of sex was no longer an intimate, loving act. Instead, it was a performance. They wanted to perform in sex as good as the men and the women they saw on the screen. So you're right when you say that each generation has had a different experience with marijuana and other drugs, and also with pornography and sex, and also with gambling. Each generation needs to be looked at differently when either you're marketing those to them or whether you're trying to help them pull back from some addiction or other damage that they have caused.
And what do you think? What do you think is going to happen to religion? What do you think is going to happen to the church in America? Right now we're seeing churches shuttered all across the country. You can't even go to church, and in most places, and if you can go to church, they're limiting it to 25, 50, 100 people or whatever it is, and a lot of churches have gone online. And I've seen reports that only 4 out of 10 people that normally attend church are doing online church. What do you think is going to happen to the church-going experience as a result of this pandemic?
Sure. And about 15 years ago, I got a call from an Episcopal priest, a woman, and she said, "Have you ever spoken to religious groups before?" And I told her, I said, "I've been presenting generational strategies now for about 6 or 7 years. And when I've given a presentation to a business audience in city after city, one individual would come up after the speech and say, 'Do you ever talk to religions?' And I said, I would love to, because there's an enormous application of generational faith-based strategies that will help all religions, if only they will let me get them into the heads of each generation." So from that, I developed, again, another world's first training program in generational faith-based strategies. I've presented it to regional groups and local groups, but I can't. It's kind of like the talking heads in Washington, David. At the top, the religions with their large national conferences. For some reason, they won't let me in, and that's okay. But here's the answer. Virtually all religions have suffered an enormous hit to membership and participation, but only to a certain extent have they taken a hit in belief. Every survey that comes out about religion shows that still a very high percentage of people in this country and around the world believe that there is a God. They're just not certain what that God is. Also, the baby boomers are the first generation to take religion in a very different direction. The older silent generation and the older greatest generation, the GIs, and all that came before that, they embraced traditional religious beliefs and traditional religious services. But boomers came along and they were searching for something that would be a better fit for the way they were being raised, the America and the world in which they were coming up. And boomers became the generation that to this day hop around from house of worship to sample different religions to try to find a home for their unique spirituality and faith and religion. There is less strong religious belief by younger Gen X and less by millennials, but those two younger generations, which have been so disenfranchised from life because of what's happened to them, they hunger for a God, they hunger for a faith that they can trust and that they can embrace. So religion's in a tug of war. I spoke to 110 priests and trained them in a 4-hour session. And after that, one of the priests stood up and he spoke to the other 109. And he said, I got to tell you, if we don't adapt Chuck's generational faith-based strategies and start getting into the generations as Chuck is describing, I think all of us could be out of business in 10 years.
What did I tell you? He is pretty remarkable, isn't he? I just love that guy. He is a walking, talking encyclopedia of history and of generational expertise. I could talk to him for hours. As a matter of fact, whenever he calls me, I can be in between this and that and be really busy and be on deadline on something, and he just pulls me away from that, and I'll ask him a question, and he gives me an hour-long answer. He's just so on top of things. I wish the news networks, these cable news networks that put on these people that allegedly know something, the pundits. I wish they would book Chuck Underwood, because, as you could see, he can connect the dots. He brings rhyme and reason to the things that we're all sort of confused about. So, if you're listening from whether it's CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or wherever you're working these days in the news side of the business, and I know some of you listen to this because I've received a few emails from you. Please absolutely do book Chuck Underwood. If you would like to know more about Chuck Underwood, check out his website, which is genimperative.com. That's gen, like generational, and that's GENIMPERATIV, genimperative.com. And you can also purchase his books and his DVDs and all kinds of great stuff on generational research that he does. And, of course, he is available if you want him to speak at your organization. So just check out genimperative.com. Well, this has been a unique CIA, Contagious Influencers of America, the podcast. For one thing, I did not mean to allude to being upset about the loss of my Big Ten season at the top of this, and especially the loss of watching my beloved Buckeyes, which they were supposed to be playing by now. And I'm sorry if you think that sounded like I was upset about it, but that would be absolutely understating it. I'm outraged. I'm outraged. I'm outraged. There you go. I had to get into my roller games character. Actually, if I was doing roller games, it could be devastating. For those of you who have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, check out Fox Sports FS1, usually on Sunday nights, late. Well, I say late. It usually starts around midnight or 12:30 on the Eastern time zone, and prime time in LA at 9:30 or so. And then again, maybe they switch it around from time to time because of live sports. But if you have FS2, it's really cool because that usually gets played in prime time across the country on Saturday nights. And the weekend that I am recording this particular episode of CIA, they're actually doing a 4-hour marathon. I mean, think about it. A 4-hour marathon of a show that I did 30 years ago on a big sports network. Now, and by the way, it does not look like it was done 30 years ago because I up-resed it, meaning I took it from the old negative to the new look. I remastered it and took it to HD, took it to 16:9. So it's a lot of fun. It's fun to watch. And even if it's only for this season, hey, you know what? I decided I am not going to let this stinking pandemic eat me alive. You know, I'm a single guy living in a house with a cat. It's just me and Cash. Okay? It's just the two of us. Just the two of us. And you know what? I just decided back in March, look, I'm going to go nuts. I'm going to go bonkers, staring at walls every night. And there's only so much TV you can binge on. And there's only so much talking to your cat you can do. So I decided I'm going to do a couple of things. Number one, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get my ass off the couch and I'm going to go out and walk. And by the way, ass is a real word, okay? I could say butt, but I'm going to say ass. I'm going to get my ass off the couch and I'm going to get out there and I'm going to walk, okay? So I started at 3 miles and I went to 5. Some nights I go 8 or 9 miles. And I just decided that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work off the anxiety, the angst, just the being upset. I'm just going to work. I'm going to walk it off. And oh my gosh, it was the most amazing thing. God has revealed so many things to me on that walk. I get to see stars. I get to listen to podcasts I never heard before. I get to talk to friends that I haven't talked with in 10 years. And it's been amazing. And I'm doing it in the middle of summer and it's been freaking hot outside, but I usually do this at, after 8:30 at night when the sun's down and it's just me and the stars. And a couple other, there were a coyote one night and yeah, there's that story. But I'm just telling you, that's the first thing I did. The other thing I did is I decided, you know what? I'm bringing back roller games, and I decided to go find my masters, go bring that thing out of the closet, and put it back on the air. And you know what? It did something for me. I had some brain cells that kind of, well, let's just say they froze up about 10, 12 years ago. They just froze up. And I could go into that, but they just froze up. And the reality is that I started working on this thing and I started having these unbelievable conversations with people that had amazing love for the visual medium. And it's like God it's like God gave me this new sense of he breathed. I heard the whisper of God. I acted on it. I got off the couch. I went walking every night. And then I took my hairdryer. I thawed out my brain cells because God told me, thaw out those brain cells and roll up the sleeves and get to work. And that's what I did. And I got this show on the air, and it's on now Saturdays and Sundays. And sometimes they put it on weekdays too. Check it out. It's called Roller Games, and it's on Fox Sports, FS1, FS2. And I want to I want to thank Chuck Underwood so much for being my guest today. I want to thank him for being a friend. I want to thank him for all of the dynamic research that he is doing. I want to thank him for stepping up to the plate and agreeing to do roller games 30 years ago. And that's where our friendship started. And I want to thank all of you for listening. This has been fun. And I appreciate you. I appreciate your emails to me. I appreciate your ideas that you're sending us now. I appreciate you sharing our website, ContagiousInfluencers.com. Also, we have CIApodcast.com, CIApodcast.com. And I appreciate you sharing those websites with your friends. And I appreciate you sharing and reviewing our podcast. That means so much to us. And please continue to do so. We remain one of the top podcasts in the spirituality section of iHeartRadio. And we're climbing the charts in some of the other places too. And it's really cool to see podcasts growing the way they are. And we never intended to be one of the top podcasts. We really just intended for this to be a service to those of us who listen to our sister radio show, which is called Keep the Faith on radio stations across the country. We just decided that we'd have a little podcast to go along with the radio show. So the podcast is really of course, the radio show is still doing well, but the podcast is really taking off, and we really appreciate that. So I'm just gonna tell you that I'm praying for y'all, and I'm thinking about you every day. Really, I know a lot of you are going through a lot of stuff right now and struggling a lot and trying to figure out your purpose. And some of you are pivoting. Some of you are in dire straits and you're trying to figure it out because you've lost your job. You're not allowed to go to church. You're scared to death to send the kids to school. You're not getting your Saturday afternoon football. Whatever it is, it's a tough time. So I just want you to know that I'm praying for you. I'm praying for our country. I'm praying for our leadership. And most of all, I'm praying that God bless our nation, despite the fact that sometimes I really wonder if we're worth it. But if you look at it compared to the rest of civilization, for the most part, we're still doing okay. We're just a little messed up right now, and we need some help. All right. So this is David Sams. This has been CIA, Contagious Influencers of America, the podcast from the producers of Keep the Faith. I should say this has been the extended David Talks Too Much edition of CIA. But I appreciate your time. Remember to go out there and live that life in living color, because it sure is a heck of a lot more interesting than living it in black and white. See you next time.